Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the January 15th, 2025 Worcester Township Board of Supervisors business meeting. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? My name is Rick DeLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Lou Betts, who's our vice chair. To my right is Steve Quigley, who is our third member. Over on the side tables in the front, we have Wendy McKenna from our solicitor's office and John Everts from our engineer's office. On the back table, we have Christian Jones, who is our assistant township manager, and Dan Demino, who is our township manager. First and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this meeting is being video recorded for future broadcast.
Thank you, Christian. First item up on our agenda is public comment. We do ask that you limit your public comment to 5 minutes. Does anybody have any public comment they wish to share with the board this evening? Okay, yeah, we can start with you over there, and then we'll come to you right there, Matt.
Okay. Hey, I just want to take a minute.
Just tell us who you are, just so we get
I'm
it on
sorry,
the
Rick,
recording.
been a while. Edmore Clayston, Valley Green, excuse me, which is the subject of my, well, later on. But first thing I had is it was just announced that this is being recorded for video broadcast. Are we sure about that? Because our record for the past almost year has been pretty spotty about not only the timeliness of getting recordings up, but getting recordings up at all. And the quality of the recordings, and I'm an avid listener of the recordings because I travel a lot, so I can't make every meeting. Not everybody talks into their microphone. Microphone's not on. Turn on the microphone, lean back. Sidebar, people talk to the front table and then the microphone, it's on, but they're looking at the board. So we're missing a lot. And I just want to know, I know that I had some email communications, and you just lost me when I turned. I had some email communications. I understand there's some things being taken to address that, but I think it's really important that we do a much better job of making sure not only that the video is timely, that there's quality, not only in the video, but in the voice recording as well. And I mean, I think we really need, as a township, to take a wholesale look at, frankly, scrapping whatever it is we have. I keep hearing there's a third-party service, but that needs to come in when a recording's been missed for 2 weeks. So I don't. So I'm open to hear what's happened so far because, like I said, the December meeting still, when I left the house, was still not out there. So is anything being done at this point?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer, I'm going to turn to Dan and ask Dan, because he's been working with the company a little bit to get some of those pieces squared away to at least make it better. I won't say we'll get all the way to where you might like us to get to, but certainly we'd like to get it improved, and we certainly would like to. I mean, part of the recording is to make sure we get them out there. We certainly strive to do that, and there's no sinisterness to not getting it out. It's just, it has been, not perfect. So, Dan, do you want to talk about some of the things? I know you've been dealing with them.
Just so you kind of know what we have going on behind the curtain back there. So the system is designed in a way where you stick a USB stick in there and record it up there. Now, the problem with USB sticks is they're a notoriously unreliable piece of hardware. So what's happening is occasionally it's just not recording to the USB. We're not losing those recordings. It is being recorded. It's recording internally to the device. We're also not set up currently to have access through an easy point where we can just access that hard drive within that machine. That's what we're looking to rectify. So we have equipment coming that will allow us to wire into that machine through a laptop essentially and pull up any of those meetings where we won't have to rely on a USB anymore, nor will we have to rely on the company coming out at a cost to us to pull a meeting off of there using their own software. We'll have the ability to do it ourselves and easily, and we won't be in a position where we'll be losing those meetings for even a short period of time. But the meetings for 2024 that aren't up right now, we have not lost any of them. We have them. We have just not been able to pull them out of the archive yet. I expect by February we'll have all of those posted.
Okay, again, the timeliness is really lacking, all told. And as an ex-IT guy, I can tell you that we outlawed USBs because of their security and unreliability. So just as an aside, since you said it. Okay, so, and again, the voice thing, you know, and I'm sure that everybody doesn't want to wear a lapel microphone, but it would help.
So duly noted. One of the things we certainly struggle with here is the acoustics in this building. We don't have an ability to change, and they're terrible. You know, the noise gets up and gets lost in the rafters and bounces around. I know sitting in the audience for a lot of years, it's hard to hear sometimes. It's hard to, so we occasionally need to remember to get to the mic, talk slower, and those things. We'll try to do a better job there. Certainly, that's one of the ways we can help that.
Right. When to bring it up, because again, it's something
Fair
we
enough.
rely on quite a bit. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up that, I was on a committee, must have been 10, 12 years ago, to speak to your concern. And I was surprised at the acoustics in here with the sound people coming in, talking about the pitch of the roof and the way things were set up. And we've really tried to fix the problem, and it's still a problem. We understand that, but we have the same problem sometimes, even from there, when you're speaking, hearing. I guess the way it bounces off, and we tried with the soundboards, with the pictures over there, to alleviate some of the echoing, but it's a work in progress.
I mean, I get it, but like if I lean back, it's going to change dramatically.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. So it's not just the acoustics, it's not just mechanics. Frankly, some of it just has to do with the utilization, which is why I was thinking about lapel pins and
Right.
or lapel mics. So people don't have to worry about leaning in, leaning out versus leaning out, et cetera. So I just wanted to bring it up, like I said, because it's a chronic problem.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ed.
Thank
you.
Appreciate your comments.
Hi, my name is Jane Voss. I'll just write this down. I live at Stony Creek Farms. I am here to talk about 1616 Whitehall Road again. I filed a right to know form with the township, and I received a very prompt reply from Mr. Domino, which I'm appreciative of. But it was obvious to me that I got it so quickly because there wasn't any information. I asked for copies of permits requested by the owner and issued by the township, and there were none. I requested copies of any citations. There were none. And I requested an aerial photograph of the property, which I did receive, and I was shocked at what is going on in that property, which is agriculturally zoned. I have here, which I printed off on my printer, so it's not very good. I have a copy of what it looks like now and what it looked like when I moved in. It's shocking to me that the township has allowed this property to get to this point. It looks like a strip mine. There's fencing, there's obviously excavation, trees down, containers, shipping containers, lots of vehicles all over the place. And there has not been one permit. So I'd really like to know what the status is and what is going to happen going forward, because honestly, I will not be satisfied until that property is returned to something resembling an agriculturally zoned property, rather than what is in my backyard, a dump.
So what I can tell you is that notices of violation have been issued to the property owner, and he has specific deadlines that he has to meet regarding seeking both zoning relief for the use, as well as some additional matters of land development, which speaks to some of the work that has transpired there. Both of those have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I believe the deadline is February 7th. Was that?
That's correct, February 7th.
So there's specific deadlines in place. So we are pursuing the matter legally within the boundaries of the law that is available to us, and we will pursue that as far as we have to get the resident in compliance. What I can tell you, and certainly Steve and Lou can concur on this, is that ultimately, we're fortunate that most of the time when we work with a resident, they come into line quickly in a manner that is consistent with the zoning. This is not moved ideally. We've issued the violations. We're pursuing it, and we will pursue it to bring the resident into compliance, or we will take whatever legal action is available to us to force that to take place. We would always like someone to cooperate in that process, but ultimately, we've had to take actions of violation that he now has an opportunity to appeal those. They then have to go before our zoning. It could then have to go to a court beyond that potentially. So there are some pieces that we don't know, but it's in motion. We're going to follow it and pursue it, and certainly we can reference several other properties through the years that we've had to go through this occasionally, and it's unfortunate, but ultimately we're aware of it. We're working on it. We don't have a conclusion today, but ultimately I can tell you we're pursuing it as far as the law will allow us to pursue.
Okay, this is my third meeting that I've come to in a row where residents have gotten up to complain about this. And it just seems like every month it's getting pushed farther and
It's
farther.
not
And
being
as far
put-
as I know,
it's
it's been
time
going
out.
on for at least a year.
So you are correct. Over the last 3 months, we're telling you what we're doing. There's no outward action that you're seeing at the property because we issue the violations. We had to gather the information, issue the violation notices. Then the resident has rights, fair, that you may or may not agree with, but he then has rights to respond to that across 30 days from the issuance of the violation. So nothing happens in those 30 days if the resident chooses to take 30 days to their fullest and then choose to take some action from there. It won't turn around and ultimately show on the property until it gets to some conclusion. That has to go before our zoning board for one piece of that. It potentially has to go to the court system potentially. So we do hear, we respect the concern. We're not just kicking the can. We're taking the actions that we can take and will continue to take ultimately. It certainly has gone on longer than we would have liked. We would have liked for the matter to come into compliance through conversation and working with residents. I can tell you we have a long history of doing that successfully with most residents. People sometimes aren't aware that they're in violation on certain things. That's not uncommon. There's a process that we go through that we've tried to be respectful of every property owner, and overwhelmingly that has worked. In this case, it has not worked quickly, so we've had to take additional actions that we don't typically like to do. I mean, that's the practical reality. We want to be a community where we're not being onerous to residents and not giving the sort of the opportunity for some of these situations to just be worked out, in an amicable way. And in this case, unfortunately, it's become a little bit more adversarial. That's not ideal, but we're taking the actions we can take, and we will follow them up to their conclusion that ultimately brings the resident into compliance, or we take some more injunctive action that would be available to us.
Okay, so one question, if he has till February 7th, I believe you said, was it?
That's the date on the notices of violation, that's
And then
correct.
what happens after that if he doesn't comply? I mean, there's so much damage to that property. It's not, if he's being required to return it to its agricultural state, that's not going to happen. We heard it today, machinery over there today.
So Dan, do you want to just share what the next step would be, or what the hope step is, and then what?
Sure. Yeah. No. So, I've dealt with a number of these in my career, for good or for bad. But so what happens is, by law, when we issue a zoning violation notice, they have 30 days to either come to compliance or appeal to the zoning hearing board. That is their legal recourse. There is no, they can't sue us directly, right? The only legal recourse is then to appeal within that 30-day period. If they do not, and they're also not in compliance, we are able to take civil action in court of common pleas, and that would be the next step of enforcement. If he doesn't either A, come into compliance by that date, or B, apply for zoning relief by that date.
Okay.
That is those. There's not a lot of outcomes from this point on. It's you comply, appeal, or we take additional. We're obligated to take additional legal action essentially.
So he has another appeal, basically, if he doesn't come into compliance after February 7th.
If he does, well, if before that date he files a zoning hearing board appeal, the violation is for the use of the property, meaning myself, really, as a zoning officer, has deemed that what is going on there is not an agricultural use. He has the right to challenge my determination that it is indeed an agricultural use, and the zoning hearing board is the pseudo-legal board that hears that appeal.
Okay. One question, this is, I have been looking at the for a zoning agenda, and there's nothing on the website showing,
There's not a hearing scheduled at this point
Okay.
for that property because he hasn't filed anything
Okay.
to request.
so the
Hearing.
earliest one would, if he would be in February then, if he does file a request for zoning.
He's past the date for what January would be, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. The
So
earliest it would be February, depending on the timing of when, if that appeal comes in at the end of the window or earlier in the window, it would either be February or March.
Okay, and then is that posted on the, is the agenda posted in advance?
Correct. It will be. I mean, once there is an actual hearing that gets scheduled, it'll all be posted and available, and you will have the ability to come in and look at all the documentation. We'll be at the township if and when that takes place. But again, the ball is in his court on that particular action. It's not in our court
Right,
to say it may or may not happen until he decides to file something.
okay,
And ma'am, you will be notified if you're within 100 feet of the property line. If your property is within 100 feet in any direction of the property line or 500 feet on the actual road itself, we actually mail you a notice with the notice that an appeal is happening.
okay. I don't know if I'm.
I don't know if you are, but certainly some of your neighbors are, so they
Well, I'm
would certainly
probably
get those.
in line with some of them, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So just keep that in mind too. There are strict notification requirements that we're obligated to follow by law, and we will follow those obligated.
Great,
Just to follow up to our chairman's comments, I believe I was out there as well as Supervisor Betts long before a lot of this stuff happened. Our previous manager, Sean, was out there as well. It was brought to our attention probably well over a year ago. We're out there.
right,
But as it turned out, with some letters going back and forth, we really don't have the authority to go on people's private property. We did walk around. I met with the fellow there once, had a conversation, and visited 2 other times. I know Mr. Betts was out there as well. So it's not something the supervisors have let someone just do what they want to do. We can only do so much. After the few visits of their old township manager, it got a little nasty, and we had to just take a step back and then work within the legal system. And sometimes the legal system moves rather slow, but that's a system that we have. Through our solicitor and our township manager, we dot our I's and cross our T's to make sure we're doing the right thing. We don't like to be nasty. We try to work with neighbors. We try to work with everybody. We don't make it a police state, but as the chairman said, most people we work with are willing, okay, let's see how we can work this out and come to an agreement. This hasn't really worked that well for us doing that, so we take the necessary steps. We've contacted the county and the state organizations that are involved in the farming aspects and the soil conservation department, and essentially turned over to them for the infractions, and they have to do their work. So we have to sit back and just wait. I understand the consequences of the action or inaction you have to deal with on a daily basis, but it's pretty much out of our hands at this point. We have to wait for the legal system to take effect and follow through on what's happening. So
Okay.
we have heard your complaints, and we've tried to work with it within the regulations and the law.
okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jane. We appreciate your comments. Does anybody else wish to make public comment before the board tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. To start with our official action items, we're going to start with the consent agenda, as we always do. First and foremost, does anybody wish to remove any items from the consent agenda tonight?
I do not.
Neither do I. Okay, then I'll entertain a motion if somebody would like to make one.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda, the January 6th reorganization minutes, the treasurer's report, and other monthly reports for December of '24, bill payment for December of '24 in the amount of $53,000.
I'll second that.
$61.63. Go ahead, now you can second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Second up, we're going to have a public hearing regarding a fence and wireless facility zoning ordinance amendment. We had talked about this last month. We've done all the necessary advertising. I'm going to hand it over to our solicitor who can handle the opening of the hearing, and we'll go through the process and then close the hearing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you indicated, this is an amendment to the zoning ordinance, so it is necessary to hold a public hearing pursuant to the requirements of the municipality's planning code. So I have a few items of administrative nature exhibits that I'll read into the record. Exhibit B1 is the Worcester Township Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 24th, 2024, recommending approval of the amendment to the zoning ordinance. Exhibit B2 is the Worcester Township meeting minutes of November 20th, 2024, authorizing advertisement of the ordinance. Exhibit B3 is the legal notice that is required pursuant to the municipality's planning code to provide notice of the public hearing regarding the ordinance. Exhibit B4 is the proof of publication that the legal notice was published on December 31st, 2024 and January 7th, 2025. Exhibit B5 is the Montgomery County Planning Commission review letter dated January 13th, 2025. The Montgomery County Planning Commission has indicated that they recommend the adoption of the ordinance. Exhibit B6 is an email to the Montgomery County Law Library providing an attested copy of the ordinance. And then Exhibit B7 is the ordinance itself, which is an ordinance amending various zoning provisions of the Township Code regarding fences and wireless communication facilities. The ordinance itself is something that the Township Manager has worked on in order to correct some issues that previously existed with regard to fences, so that in the past, the ordinance was such that that required folks to go to the zoning hearing board on a fairly regular basis with respect to fences. So this ordinance provides that a fence or wall of any style up to 48 inches in height, excluding a retaining wall as permitted by this chapter and excluding chain link fence, may be installed in the side or rear property line in any residential district, and a fence or wall of any style up to 72 inches in height, excluding a retaining wall as permitted by this chapter and excluding a chain link fence, may be installed no closer than 3 feet to any side or rear property line in any residential district. It also has certain provisions that provide barbed wire shall not be used as a part of fences around residential dwellings. Barbed wire shall not be used as a part of fences for non-residential uses except by special exception upon showing a need for extraordinary security measures. No fence shall be constructed out of fabric, junk vehicles, appliances, tanks, or barrels. And then the ordinance also provides with respect to our chapter for wireless communication facilities. That provision in our code was a standalone provision and was not part of the zoning ordinance. So we've brought that section into the zoning ordinance. And that's essentially a summary of the ordinance. I'll let Mr. Domino add anything that he might think is important for the board to note.
No, that pretty much covers it all. The original intention was to get the difference between a 5-foot permitted fence and a 6-foot standard 6-foot privacy fence. As you guys know, it was going in front of the zoning hearing board quite a bit because
Right.
6 feet privacy fences are standard sized fences. So that was the main thing, and I just added those other little bits to make sure we were covered while we were in there tweaking it.
Okay.
So that's a summary of the ordinance, and since this is a public hearing, we'll ask if there's anyone in the public who has any comments or questions with respect to the ordinance. Okay, seeing none, at this point we can close the public hearing and then reopen the public meeting so the board may take action with respect to the ordinance.
Thank you, Wendy. So now moving down to motions. First item under the motions would then be a motion to adopt a fence and wireless facilities zoning ordinance amendment. So ultimately, Lou, then you, if you'd like to, you can make a motion on that and we can look to adopt it.
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the fence and wireless facilities zoning ordinance as amendment as stated.
And I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next up, we're going to have a motion to adopt a resolution 2025-06, which is going to be approving the C. Bradford and Sandra B. Smith minor subdivision plan. So last month, some of you were here for that. And it was sort of the mechanics of last month. We sort of had to have a vote in order to draft the resolution that we're talking about this month. I'm going to try to paraphrase a few pieces of it, and I'm going to handle to either one of if either one of my fellow board members has questions and comments. This was a minor subdivision. Ultimately, it's a parcel of approximately 10 acres that is splitting into two. One that's going to be about a little bit under 8, one that's going to be about 2.5. The existing house, the pieces are going to stay on the existing 7.7 acre parcel, and then there's going to be some construction that's going to take place on the other 2.5 acres. It's gone through the process with our planning commission. Our planning commission recommended to this board that it should be approved. The Montgomery County Planning Commission issued their letter saying that they think it should be approved. Our engineer, and I'm going to ask him to comment in a couple of minutes, has been through the process with the homeowner of making sure that everything is sort of in sync with our zoning and all the requirements. Predominantly, this is because it's considered minor. There really isn't a lot that needs to be done from land development. It just sort of needs to be all articulated correctly. There was also a letter from PICO, which sort of abuts the property in support of this as well. And then there were certainly some residents, both at the Planning Commission at last month's, who expressed support for this particular minor subdivision. John, if you could just take a quick minute. I know we talked briefly about this last month, but there were a couple of minor waivers that were part of this particular plan. I'd just like you to sort of generalize a comment. I know we have your review letter that sort of talks through some of that, but maybe you could just get that on the public record for us, please.
Sure thing. This is the second review that we performed on this subdivision application. Majority of the comments were addressed. The applicant is seeking 6 waivers in their waiver request letter. 2 of those waivers are actually deferrals. The 2 deferrals are for the minimum width of the paving of the roadway. There's only a small portion of the property that's along the roadway. The other is to not require sidewalks. So we request that a note be added to the plan to defer these requirements in the future if the township ever requires them. The last 4 waivers are general waivers that are usually given by the board. Do you want me to read through all 4 of them to go specifically?
I don't know if we need to do that unless there
Yeah,
were.
we see no issue with granting any of the waivers.
I mean, I know one of them was for some tree coverage and there's already trees there. So sort of giving a waiver to say you don't need to put more trees where there's already trees, I think, made common sense. And then there were a couple that just seemed to be consistent with how the property is sort of aligned in some of the sight lines. It sounded like the waivers were more just sort of syncing those pieces up. But I'll defer to my left and to my right if either you guys have specific questions regarding the subdivision plan or any of the review letters or any of the information we've been presented with.
I have no problem with it.
I have none.
Okay, and if somebody would like to make a motion on that, I will entertain it.
Make a motion to approve and adopt Resolution 2025-06, approving the Bradford and Sandra B. Smith minor subdivision plan.
And I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Brett? You just need to come in.
I'm Brad Smith. I'm the applicant in this case. And if you had the resolution in front of you, if you look under conditions of approval, letter B, it says compliance with all comments and conditions set forth in the Montgomery County Planning Commission review letter of November 20th, 2024. I don't remember seeing that letter. Could somebody get me that letter at some point?
Absolutely. Do you have it? I mean,
Yeah, you can have my copy.
You have it?
thank you, Brett.
There's nothing in that letter. Yeah.
If Brad's hesitant for us to pass it with him
I don't want to.
obligated, there's nothing really in there that's going to trick him.
Yeah, essentially it's a clean letter. There was just general information comments that were in there.
We good? Okay. Is there any additional public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next up, it's deja vu. We've got another motion to adopt Resolution 2025-07, which will be approving the Wangia, and apologies if I mispronounced that, subdivision plan. And so this one was not presented to us last month. John or Dan, do you guys want to take a couple minutes, just sort of talk through again, it's a similar minor subdivision, but let's talk through it a little bit because there are a couple of other pieces that are a little bit different on this one.
Sure, this is considered a minor land development since it's 3 lots. It's an existing 9.53 acre parcel in the AGR district on the western side of Hollow Road to create 3 lots as follows. Lot 1 will be the 2.4 acre lot to contain the existing single family detached dwelling. Lot 2 will be 2.83 acre lot intended for future development as a single family detached dwelling, and Lot 3 will be a 4.24 acre lot, flag lot intended for a single family detached dwelling. All future dwellings will be served by private water and private sanitary sewer. This is the second review that we also performed on this project. Minor comments were included in the review letter. The applicant said that they all will comply. As similar to the previous subdivision, they had requested 3 waivers. 2 of them we will be deferrals. Same thing, road widening, or concrete curbing and new sidewalk on the property frontage. The property frontage is a little over 50 feet. Actually, I misspoke. It's along the frontage, the full frontage. But they are requesting that there's no curbing and sidewalk. So we request that to be a deferral. So in the future, if the township decides to put that in, that the the applicant's responsible for it. The last waiver is actually for a traffic impact fee. This is required for any lots that are three lots or larger. The traffic impact fee associated with this project would be $6,250. The planning commission did recommend granting that waiver.
Yeah, my understanding was it was 2 trips. Ultimately, that we didn't think it was an onerous traffic impact and was not unreasonable
Correct.
to grant that, was my understanding.
Casey did indicate that he didn't see an issue with granting that waiver.
Understood. I don't either. And I'll defer to left and right to see if they think that's of any concern. The other thing, I guess, that I would want to stress that's a little bit different is it's a subdivision, but on the 2 new lots, there, Lot 2 and Lot 3, there's no plan to develop them today. And ultimately, when they get to a point of wanting to put a single-family home on there, there's a need to then submit a plot plan, and like us approving the subdivision is not approving the homes on the lots, if that and I might not be saying that exactly right, but
That's correct. So when the subdivision plan is recorded, and in the future, when they decide to sell these lots, they will have to come back in front of the township to get building permit plans.
gotcha. Steve, Lou, any questions on this particular one?
Nope, I'm good.
No, sir.
And again, just for the record, our planning commission did approve this. The Montgomery County Planning Commission did recommend for approval as well. We had John's review letters. They took through the process on this particular case as well, and they were all in favor of granting preliminary final approval on this. If somebody would like to make a motion, I will entertain it.
Make a motion to adopt and approve Resolution 2025-07, approving the, again, Wangia subdivision plan. Did I say it right?
I think so.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next up is going to be a motion to authorize submission to the PA Department of Environmental Protection, also known as the DEP, of the corrective action plan for the Berwick wastewater treatment plant. So between Dan and John, I'm going to ask you guys to sort of fill in the pieces on this one a little bit. And guys, we might want to have a little bit of a discussion as well.
Yeah. So as required by DEP, monthly reports are required to be submitted to demonstrate compliance with the permits that are associated with the Berwick wastewater treatment plant. As part of those monthly reports, it determines flow to the plants and organic loading. These monthly reports are gathered and they're provided in a yearly report that's provided to DEP. It's called a Chapter 94 report. From these reports, it is anticipated that within 5 years, there will be an organic overload to the wastewater treatment plant at Berwick. The plan that's in front of the township today is to correct this overload of organic materials with the anticipation of upcoming developments that are proposed in the township. A developer submitted a correction action plan paid for by them for the township to submit to get approved by DEP. As part of those correction action plan, the improvements to the plant will be the upgrade of blowers, aeration blowers, and 2 retrofits to existing blowers to increase the capacity for the organic overload. There is no hydraulic capacity planned at this part. The existing plant has 150,000 capacity for 150,000 gallons per day. Currently, they're at about 75,000. So the issue is specifically for organic overload. This is the first part in a long process to get DEP to approve potential sanitary sewer connections for projects in the future.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions for you, John, so we can sort of put some arms around this. So my understanding is, to date, we haven't exceeded the capacity, but it is projected across the next 5 years that we will. It is, that's sort of what's in the annual
Yeah,
report,
so they
correct?
look at a 3-month average, and the last few years, there has been 1 month out of each year that we were very close, or if not slightly over what was allowed.
Okay. So, and then they take a look at the projected development and say, you're going to go over and you need to take action to deal with that. So, where we're at 250 pounds per day, we need to increase that to 325 pounds per day. Is that my understanding?
That's correct, with the anticipated development, yes.
Gotcha. Now, and this is where I just want to make sure we get it on the record. So even if we decide to do this, we're not approving anyone's development. We're not approving anyone to do anything. This is sort of one of these, so we've got a green light the ability to send the corrective action plan to DEP. DEP will then decide whether or not that's an acceptable corrective action plan. And if they say that it is, then ultimately, and correct my numbers again if they're wrong, it will then become part of the planning module for the development when they have to submit a planning module for the development to DEP? Is that,
Yes, so those improvements will need to be implemented before any connections can be made. So essentially, right now, even if there was a single-family house that wanted to make a connection to go to the Berwick wastewater treatment plant, there's a possibility that DEP would not allow that connection based on what the anticipated overload is.
gotcha. But ultimately, in terms of this, saying yes to the corrective action plan is not saying yes to actually do it. It's simply us saying yes to send it to DEP so they can decide whether it's appropriate and then send it back so that it can then be included in the planning module to then actually do the corrective action, which would be part of a future vote we would have to take.
Correct, correct. So for any project that would come in, they would have to fill out a component 3, and there would be a resolution by the township. It would have to be reviewed by the county, the Township Planning Commission, and the Health Department. There's all multiple aspects of that that need to be included in the submission, and that goes to DEP for approval as well.
Okay. So let me start with to the left or to the right. Do you have any questions ultimately in terms of what we are actually voting on if we move forward on this motion? Like, do we understand what we're sending in and what we're agreeing to or not agreeing to?
I got a number of questions. One,
Sure.
you're stating that there are monthly reports, and I guess whoever's contracted does these monthly reports. Is anybody reading them? Do we get a response? Are we doing it right or wrong? Berwick is over 30 years old. It's aging, adding cells and repairs. We've had a number of pump failures at Meadowwood, Adair Drive, Center Point was rebuilt in the millions of dollars. And Berwick was built for that neighborhood at the townhouses at Mount Kirk. And now then when he added the Prenzio, which is Church Road, down the street, that's Wheat Chief, and then down the street, forget the name of the neighborhood down here, and then there's Chadwick up by the high school. So it's been taxied, and you're gonna try to add more. So I don't know. We have contracted our sciences, and I would like almost another opinion on another firm to evaluate what we have, what condition they're in, who's reading these reports, do they comply? And I'm going to ask you a bunch of more questions, even if I even get a report from Earth Sciences, because that's who we contracted to do our environmental. They do that kind of work. And again, I want to have more and more questions. So I don't know how we can pass anything other than you just want to do a corrective action. I think there has to be more discovery on this before you can pass anything. That's my opinion. So unless you want to educate me differently, more research and more discovery, just like it would be any case. So,
John, you want to Well, do you want to talk about, I guess you,
So what specific questions do you have, Lou?
And again, I'll start with number one. There are monthly reports. Who's doing them? Are they qualified? Who's reading them?
So there's a
DEP.
contractor, that you guys have a contractor for your wastewater treatment plants, PUE, Public Utility Enterprises, that have been in the township for multiple years. They run multiple wastewater treatment plants throughout the southeast region. They prepare those monthly reports. They provide us the CKS, and we prepare the yearly Chapter 94 reports.
I'll defer to other questions.
I remember sitting here a number of years ago, and our old solicitor, Jim Garrity, said they kept development out of Worcester by not having any sewer systems. So that stopped the development for a lot of the Worcester. You know, they chose not to run it from place to place. You know, you connect it at the first street, the second street can tie in. And I think that's sort of what Mr. Betts is alluding to, the fact by encouraging the repairs of the sewer plant or any additions, is this allowing a possible development to hook in? If we took no action at all, what would be the outcome?
So the two potential projects that are looking at this connection are within the Act 537 plan that was approved by the township. So the sewer planning was approved multiple years ago. So these parcels were accounted for to be treated by Berwick wastewater treatment plant. The original Act 537 plan, I think, was approved in the late 90s. And at that time, these two parcels, this whole area was included in there. The treatment capacity of the plant is 150,000 gallons per day. You're currently at 75,000. We did a study of potential connections for the Dubner property and the Western property, and included that in a report to the township manager. My predecessor did that, and it's still within the capacity of the plant. The organic overload is exceeding or close to be exceeding now. Per the proposed improvements to the blowers that will increase that. There is no hydraulic capacity being added to the plant. It's just equipment at this point. If the township doesn't move forward, it opens them up, I think, maybe to some sort of litigation, because they are in the sewage 537 treat area.
I'll chime in with, to piggyback on with that, the township has, as John has stated, the 537 planning means that the township did plan that these properties would be served by public sewer. So this is not a decision that this board is making tonight. That decision was made some time ago, and a developer would have the potential, there would be a potential for an action if the township somehow would now say we're not going to provide public sewer to these properties. We're not going to take steps to do that. There's potential that DEP could order the township to do this, and the situation is such that the developer has agreed to pay for the costs of these improvements. So that's certainly a benefit to the township. The township is not incurring those costs. These are costs that the developer will be paying, and financial security will be provided for those improvements.
So I don't want to say the sins of our past are coming back to haunt us, but the decisions we made back then, we have to live with now. I mean, it's there. And I guess we went to the planning commission, we're looking at this whole thing, and that's one of the reasons
Right.
why they selected that site was there's sewer there already in place.
But it even predates that.
It predates that exactly.
It goes back to the late 90s in terms of the 537 plan, and there's too many numbers for my liking with the various plans and timing on it. But ultimately, it's, if I'm understanding correctly, this is not a case where the plant is already at capacity and we're trying to squeeze more capacity out of the plant. It's simply sort of modernizing a couple of pieces so that it runs more effectively to what it's already capable of doing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I guess, Mr. Chairman, just to revisit it, not saying a certain development's going in, but when we looked at where to put multifamily units within the township, the Montgomery County Planning Commission did their study, and we discussed in meetings about picking alternate sites within the township. And if we were to pick some of those sites that had no access to public sewer, we were advised that the people looking to put these units in could say we're acting in bad faith, and essentially we could be forced to put them somewhere else in the township that may be appealing to them. So by taking the action, we're following the sewer, we put the possibility of development where the sewer plant was,
Right.
rather than being forced into a legal battle for trying to restrict development based on non-sewer. So that's where we're at, so.
Right. So, but unwrapping that a little bit, Lou, and some of your concerns, I think that both of those things can happen, meaning that we could decide to send this along to DEP for their piece, but it sounds like you also have some general concerns about the plan itself that you'd like our environmental engineer to take a look at. Is that my understanding?
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I would love them, as we've contracted Earth Sciences as
Yeah.
environmental. And I would like them to be a consultant, since we've already contracted them for other reasons. And if they could review it before we send it,
Well, they're not going to,
we're confirming that the report is correct. So you have two people that are agreeing on corrections. Does that make any sense?
well, I mean, I think we need to send this along regardless, because we're going to need, that process doesn't require us to do anything other than to send it on its way. Having the environmental engineer take a look at anything you're uncomfortable with, I think we can do that too. Like, I think we can do both things, but I don't think we need to hold up sending this piece in order to also do that,
Okay.
I guess is, I don't know.
So noted.
It's a separate action. I think if
I'm-
I'm hearing Mr. Betts, he wants to make sure that we have a proper team in force to make sure everything's being done to dot the i's and cross the t's and nothing's missed regarding this project.
Understood. And I agree with that. So John, and I'm going to put you on the spot just for a second. I mean, typically when we send things along to DEP, it's, you know, they go there to die. You know, I mean, you don't typically see, what's the type of return? It's typically not days, it's typically months and years.
It's 3 to 6 months, probably.
Right.
You know, and that's if they agree with the improvements to the plan.
Okay. And then,
I think a condition of that as well is that we want we want the agreements and the financial security from the developers posted before we submit that correction action plan.
right. Well, that would be part of the motion. I mean, what, the mechanics of that, Wendy? I mean, we just,
Well, it's, if you were to make a motion that stated that it was, that the developer was to comply with the CKS letter of January 9th with respect to security, that.
okay.
Rick, just another question. We're half the capacity, we're half the capacity on the sewer plant. What happens in the future? I think Mr. Betts had brought up the possibility, the far out possibility of Methacton High School making their changes and renovations there. What happens if they need sewer? What happens then? There's no sewer capacity for the school, and they're looking at something, their plans in the next couple of years. Would it be another plant need to be put in, or how would that be handled?
Or an additional upgrade to the existing Berwick plant that would increase capacity. Because the flows from the high school would probably challenge what the hydraulic capacity of the plant would be. There's still some, even with the proposed development, you're probably in, the low, 105,000 gallons per day treatment. So there's still plenty of capacity left after the proposed residential developments. I don't, can't anticipate what the school flow would be. Right now, they have their own treatment plant, small plant that they run. But it might even be cost prohibitive to get the high school to the Berwick plant.
Steve, I can jump in on that because I was just at that meeting. They are actually not in our Act 537 plan. They're actually would be going to a plan in Lower Providence if they were to connect. They would be connecting to not this plan.
It makes sense. Like, I think we discussed that before, especially now, where they're proposing to do an addition, they don't have to go uphill. There's more of a downward flow down to the connection there on Germantown Pike.
Yeah, so that would not be, even if they decided to connect, it wouldn't be to Berwick.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So I think what I think I would like to do, and hopefully you'll concur, is that we'll vote on the motion to be able to send this corrective action plan to DEP as one action. Separately, we'll hand over to Dan to work with Earth Sciences to get them to review basically everything we have on that plant. So we can get comfortable ultimately that they're comfortable with that particular plant can handle everything that,
I'm with you as long as
in
you.
terms of that. So that's what I'd like to do. Is that all right with you? All right. So we're going to start with a motion. If you would make one on the,
I'll make a motion that we approve a corrective action plan for the Berwick wastewater treatment plant with approval of Earth Sciences as a secondary.
no. The Earth Sciences is not part of this
I'm not
motion.
going to do that.
So this is just a motion to send this corrective action plan to the Department of Environmental Protection for the corrective action plan for the Berwick wastewater treatment plant. That's one item, and that's one motion.
That's step one is what you're stating.
Correct.
We're going to make a motion to approve a corrective action plan for Berwick wastewater treatment plant. And I guess I'll stop reading.
Okay.
Second.
Excuse me, I think you would want to add there, and that would be conditioned upon compliance with the CKS January 9th
Okay.
letter with respect to posting financial security.
Okay. So we'd like to amend the motion to reflect the comments that the solicitor has just made relative to the CKS review letter as part of that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Bob?
Bob Andover, Morchester. So it's kind of impossible to determine, whether the cart is before the horse or the horse is before the cart in terms of how it was presented. So specifically, I give you credit, or John credit, for putting this plan together, and that's anticipating that this change needs to happen. The question is did he put it together, or did BT or BET put it together? And I think that maybe they did, and that's self-serving on them, specifically kind of when you look in the context of John saying a single homeowner could potentially have a development held up because of this specific component. So I think that you need to go ahead regardless, and you need to make those changes. That anticipates all of that. Where you have fallen way short is to make a deal with a private developer in the tune of $50,000. So your sewer fund, this doesn't necessarily affect me because I'm not part of the sewer plan, but your sewer fund has either $1 million or $2 million available. And you're talking about a $50,000 investment that needs to be made. So the board should authorize that. They should proceed with that, and they should have absolutely nothing to do with a private developer to try and save that, because there's a special deal in there that benefits, there's capacity that's held aside for the developer, and then there's recoupment costs that he can achieve if other people want to tie in for that. And you can recover those particular costs by charging the people who are participating in the sewer. So whether that's current residents who are part of that, you could take it out of the fund and not charge anybody else. It could be part of your annual investment. And if there's a significant number of people that are tying into the sewer, in this particular case, City View, who's funding this, then they're going to be paying that portion of it. So I think you should amend the stuff going forward, and I think you should get out of making a sweetheart deal. As if you look at Talaminson, they were just recently going to have hundreds of millions of dollars invested by selling their sewer plant, and they quickly realized that was a problem, and they've since backed off of that. So in this particular case, you're making a deal. I want to be cautious because they will be before, I'm speaking as a private citizen, I'm not speaking as a member of the Planning Commission. They have been before the Planning Commission. I'm not opposed to the developments that are proposed, but I don't think that you should be making any deal with a private developer to participate in any costs for those expenses.
Thank you, Bob. Is there any other public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor?
I have a question.
Sure.
Based on Bob's comment, I remember reading in the our agenda, and Bob brought it up. The question is, if Bob wants to tie into the sewer up there at some point, how do they recapture their money? Does BET, what rate can they charge someone to tap into the sewer in the future? Is that regulated, or, I mean, do they, I think to Bob's point, now we're in business with a private company having access to our sewer. Or is not that, are we reading it wrong?
So it's a private developer providing money to upgrade the plant to make connection. So that, say it's $50,000. The other project is going to piggyback onto that, the Western project that's down the road further from Trooper Road. And I'm assuming that that's what that entails, is that if that connection's made and BET pays for that, is that it's going to be a split cost between those two entities. So I mean, that's kind of why we have that condition on there for financial security and agreement, that those things would be worked out at that time. I would make the suggestion when it comes to that point that any cost for connection by a private township resident would not be reimbursed back to BET, because it'd be minimal. It'd be like, $50, at one point. So I don't see it as going into business with a private entity. It would be more money for the township to do the improvements because it would have to go out to bid. It'd be prevailing wage. So that's one of the cost savings.
Right.
I mean, that would be something to work out in the agreement. That I don't see how that BET would make a single-family residential house pay them to make that connection.
So, so maybe we need to table this for the next month because I don't want to leave that open-ended. I mean, my interpretation was that they were going to do the upgrades, then there was no pass-through that was taking place. But if we need to take some steps to sort of clearly articulate that or make a decision that we'll just do it
There was an
independently. I mean, but I don't want to have, caveats that talk about somebody paying money down to BET down the line. I mean,
that was in the letter, the letter request last week, that was included. That's where Bob saw that. That was included in the package, so.
I'm sorry, I can't hear
That
you.
was included in the package. That's where Bob got that information. It was the letter from BET from last Thursday. That's
Right. Well, it sounds like there's still some open question.
Yeah, just, once again, as Bob brought it up, I remember reading it, and I'm just, be
Right.
careful who your business partners are sometimes. And not that he's business partner, but I think we just relook at it to make sure
Right.
we don't get caught somewhere not anticipating something that, we don't do this all the time, Rick. They're in a business, they do it all the time. And this is not their first trip down this lane, and they know what to look for. And I just want to make sure that
Sure.
we're being diligent with the actions we take.
If I may.
Pete? Sure.
Peter Cleland, on behalf of BET Investments, BET Worcester. I didn't think we would need to get into this much detail. The recapture agreement that we included in our funding commitment letter, I think the point's sort of been made. We've been asked to fund these improvements to the township's sewer treatment plant that would otherwise be the township's responsibility to do and pay for, to facilitate the proper continued operation of the sewer treatment plant. The function of the recapture agreement was simply that Westrom, who's also in the room, anticipates using most of the additional capacity that's being freed up through these improvements. We're taking, John, remind me with the letter, I think 55% of the capacity that's being freed up. I think Westrom is probably looking at another 30% of that. So 85% of that $50,000 is going to be used by us in those future connections if we should be so lucky to have our projects approved. If it helps you tonight to move this forward, I'm willing to remove the recapture portion of this entirely. We'll just handle it ourselves as a gentleman outside of the room and not involve the township in any of that leftover 15% capacity that's in there. That's fine.
Okay.
As I said, I like to pick my business partner sometimes.
Yeah, we didn't see it as being business partners with the township. We were simply trying to get back the money from that leftover capacity and the job from whoever it goes to in the future. But it's trivial. It's not worth arguing about.
Thank you, Pete. So solicitor, what are the mechanics of that if we wanted to amend to account for that?
I think your motion would simply be that there would be no recapture provision in any, the financial security agreement that would be entered into to secure the
Okay.
funding of the improvements.
Thoughts?
Jeff?
Okay. Thoughts?
I'm good.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. There's been public comment. I'll now call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay. Okay, so next up, we've got a motion to authorize advertisement of the Church Road no parking ordinance. So some folks who've been here in past months, a few months ago, we had an ordinance that we were considering, and then we sort of took a step back on that. Dan, I'm going to ask you to sort of fill in some of the pieces here. We're not voting on the ordinance tonight, but we're back to a spot of saying, do we want to advertise for that? So Dan, maybe you could sort of fill us in on what has happened since that earlier meeting and tonight, and then the board can discuss it and vote on it accordingly, or not.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. So if everyone remembers, there were some residents from that affected area that were in. There were a group of people that didn't want any parking restrictions. There was a group of people that wanted total parking restrictions. If you recall, there was a Bowman traffic site triangle analysis done on the church or the Wheat Chief and Church intersection. They recommended basically a minimum distance they recommended for safety concerns to a maximum distance of essentially that entire frontage of that development. The first draft of this, the first go around, it took the maximum requirement, which essentially banned parking all the way down to the township line. This updated version essentially splits the difference. It takes into account the minimum possible distance that Bowman recommends for safe site distances, and would still allow for some parking farther down outside of those. So I think it's one of those things where everybody's going to come away a little bit not 100% happy because it's a compromise, but it serves the purpose of making that intersection safe according to qualified traffic engineers. And I think from a township perspective, at this point, that's what we would be obligated to do for safety purposes, if that makes sense.
It does. So Lou, I'm going to start with you. I know originally you had brought this one forward, and then we tabled it so that we could go back and sort of rework it a little bit. Maybe you could give us your input as to whether you're comfortable kind of with the changes that have been made, and if you think that sort of satisfies what we're trying to accomplish there, or if you have any other thoughts on it.
I trust Dan on this one because I think we're making a compromise. And to the public that may be here, if it affects the safety of the people parking on Church Road for that development, because I don't believe when it was built, they didn't take a lot of things into consideration. And it all started with some commercial vehicles parking on the road and visual impairment. So I believe that if we could move forward with this, and I'm gonna, after reviewing with Dan, Bowman was just more like just make it all no parking and that's the end of it, and I think that was kind of poor. So I'm gonna think it's a great idea at this point, and again, if it doesn't work out or it's a safety issue, we can always adjust it and retract it. I mean, I think we're trying to do positive, proactive. If it doesn't work out, we can address it at a future date. Your comment?
Steve, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a start, and we can always move the sign down a little bit, as Mr. Betts said, if something's not working out. But, I think the intersection's a real problem there, that based on the pictures and the residents coming in, it's a real safety issue. So I think we have to do something to get this at least started.
So I'll add a couple of comments. One is I think it's a good compromise, an imperfect but good compromise. It gets us to address. So a resident, he's here tonight, and I'm not going to, he had made note of the fact we got a bunch of intersections that have parking issues and sightline issues and things of that nature. So Dan, there's sort of an offshoot of this, which is that, going into 2025 and moving forward, we need to do a more proactive way of sort of saying, what are the intersections we need to be looking at proactively in dealing with sightline issues and things of that nature, whether it's cutting back visibility on either side, and we have a number of them. This is by no means the only one. This one happened to come before us. We got the traffic engineer involved. They put forward a sightline assessment, and that's what sort of got us to here. So I think that One is I agree that we should pass the motion so that we can advertise this and we can consider passing this at next month's meeting. But secondarily, we should sort of get our list together of where are the places we need to be looking at, prioritized a little bit so that we can start knocking some of those off, because it's by no means the only one, and we don't want to sort of take a step that isn't sort of trying to be more holistic in addressing some of these issues of visibility and sight lines for intersections that are challenging. So,
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that, with a township as old as Worcester, you've got old roadways that in many cases are essentially just paved over where there were horse tracks. So sight distance triangles were not, a thing back in the 1800s or even earlier. So it's a good example is when you look at layout of Philadelphia or some of the older East Coast cities versus a Oklahoma City, which is very straight and organized because it's a newer city under newer regulations. So that's some of the issue here. So I agree there are certainly a number of intersections out there. You can almost argue probably a majority of intersections out there in the township do not technically meet sight distance safety, sight triangle safety requirements as they would have been required to do if they were built today.
fair enough. So, Lou, you want to make a motion on this one?
Make a motion that we approve to authorize an advertisement for Church Road, states no parking ordinance.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to other business, we've got Skip Back EMS contribution discussion on there. So, Dan, I'm going to hand it to you to
If the board
wax poetic and share some thoughts, and we'll have a little conversation on that.
If the board recalls, there was a presentation done by Skip Back EMS a number of months ago before my arrival, which was a general idea of my understanding of that presentation was it was a request for funding from Worcester Township to supplement their operations in the township. To just give a quick, brief rundown, the current contribution that Worcester makes for emergency management or emergency medical services is $0. We do not contribute anything to any of the ambulance companies that cover Worcester Township. For instance, Skip Back, who is completely covered by Worcester or by Skip Back EMS, that's the only coverage they have, has an emergency medical services millage as well as reimbursement of a per call, $225 per call in the township. So there's a significant amount of funding coming from other townships to this organization, but none from us, and they are our largest provider by a significant margin. I know that we've had some just basic discussions with them. I mean, I have had some basic discussions with them. From an administrative standpoint, believe that it is not an out of line request for us to contribute, some amount on a per call basis. My recommendation would be if we do it, to do it on a per call basis, seeing as if the other 3 ambulance companies that cover us decide they would like to also come to us for similar funding, it would be simply a per call. We would set what that is, and that's what we would go with. But ultimately, it's a decision of the board if this is something they A, want to do, B, how much they want to do, if they just want to match Skip Back or do a different number. That's kind of where we stand, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So I got a couple of questions. So if I'm not mistaken, we have 4. Our most recent plan has 4. Skip Back is the lion's share, but there's 3 other EMS
Correct.
providers as well. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
So how does the call volume? So I've got the Skip Back EMS report from the end of December, and it's got calls dispatched 641, transported 342, and then some other, and then covered by other squads 204. I think we've talked, in our meetings, saying that everybody thinks some contribution makes sense. What I am concerned with is how much to all, you wouldn't want to make contribution to Skip Back, but not to the other 3 providers. At least I think that would create a different problem. But then I guess you worry about the math when we start Like, I don't know that we have numbers from the other.
Well, we do. So what I can tell you is if we were to give, based on our total call volume, from all of the providers in the township last year, you'd be looking at anywhere from 150 to $200,000 in contributions. Secondarily, to some extent, and this is just my humble opinion, is Skip Back has come and asked for funding to help fund their ongoing operations and make sure they're stable going forward. The other ambulance companies have not asked us for funding. So to some extent, I would expect if funding was required or requested, that they would do a similar action to what Skip Back did and come and ask. But again, there's nothing stopping us from saying this is what we're going to do for all of our ambulance calls across the board. They certainly would be appreciative, I'm sure.
Thoughts?
I guess there's no free ride in life anymore. I mean, it's we've got away with it for a long time, and I think we've had this discussion over the years. Part of Skip Back's problem, and it's not our problem, but I guess it is our problem, is they have to take care of the prison, and the prison has a lot of usage, and the funding they get back from the state is what the state gives them. It's not very good. So based on where Skip Back's located, they sort of get screwed, I guess, in the long run, to say it nicely. I think it's a situation, as we watch our TV at night with the devastation happening in California, you don't know how important the services are until you really need them. And when you need them. So I think we had the conversation with people from Skip Back. We understand the plight of their problem. And I think it comes back to public safety within Worcester, much like the fire company. I think we've been very generous working with the fire company. If they need something, we've really helped them out because it's really about the safety of the residents of Worcester. And we've said before that the fire people are all volunteers. You know, they all have jobs. They coach your kids' baseball teams at night and like to have picnics with their families at home. And they shouldn't need to have 2,000 more chicken barbecues each year to raise money for the fire trucks.
Right.
And that was the perception of some of the supervisors I worked with in the past. And it was wrong. And I think we're at the same cross point right now, the crossroads with the fire company. I'm just not sure what the right number is, Dan. I guess you're researching it and trying to come up with something. It's per call. I guess how do other townships work with Skip Back to try to alleviate some of the financial problems?
Yeah, so with what how the you're basically talking about anywhere from 240 to 275 if you include their millage that they charge plus the 225 they give them per call. So, you know, if we're not going to do a millage, I don't think that's maybe a good choice. I certainly don't think, my opinion is that's not a good choice for us. And obviously you can't do that in the middle of the year anyway. I think that the best thing to do it on a per call basis and for a minimum of 225, but potentially, you know, a little bit more to counteract the fact that, you know, we're not also instituting a millage for this as well. But again, it's really up to the board how they want to proceed with that.
I guess, is there anything with our neighbor and friend, Mr. Bradford, as far as a grant out there to help us offset some of these costs? Is there something that the state has a program for medical services for the public?
It's certainly something I could look into, absolutely. I have not at this time looked into it. This obviously isn't a motion, this is just a discussion item. It's mostly, you know, a direction on, do I want to do something? Do you want me to do something a little more, you know, draw something up, draft something more formal to say, hey, we're going to make a resolution to do this for this amount for whatever it's decided.
Yeah, I think as a neighbor, as a adjoining neighbor, it's nice to support them in their effort to provide service to the residents of Worcester in a time of need. So whatever you do, I think I'll just wait for your actions.
So I'll give you a little more direction if I can, Dan. So they have the facility over at Meadowood. So while we're not making a direct contribution, they are getting some measure of contribution from Meadowood for sure. So I would want to sort of account for that
Correct, and those numbers I gave you do account for that.
Okay.
Meadowood actually purchases a subscription for
Yep.
every one of their residents and provides them that location out of their own funding. So the numbers that I gave you are there's another 400 or so calls a year that come out of Meadowood that
Yep.
I'm not building into that we would not be doing that for because they're already subscribed.
Gotcha. So I want to make sure the numbers that we're getting in our report, that we understand what they are in terms of that. I think we certainly, a per call does make sense. And I guess the other part, Steve, you mentioned the president, the other big surprise was on the Medicare side in terms of what the reimbursement is. Significantly less than what it is cost per call was one of the other areas that I seem to recall. And I'd want to go back and maybe confirm those numbers if we could to understand that. So we sort of know what the shortfall really is and sort of what we're
Would
contributing.
it be helpful if I asked them to? They've been more than willing to send someone back over here and go over those numbers themselves in a public forum again. If that's something that would be helpful, I certainly could set that up, or I could just get those numbers myself and break it down if that works better. It's really up to you guys and what you think the public wants to see.
Yeah, I think personally, they've already made the pitch to us. I think if you work on the numbers, as far as I'm concerned, that'd be fine with me, but I'm not sure how the other board members would feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, you and I had the presentation, several months ago. I don't know what your thoughts are. I don't know that we need to have the specific presentation again, but I want to just validate the numbers, I guess, is my bigger concern. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are, when I remember the presentation, as I recall it, they stated that if they go to a car accident, the insurance company always pays them relatively quickly. When you have a fall and Medicare or other insurance, and they have to wait for their money, so they may or may not pay, and they may pay 30%, 50%, whatever they're requiring to do. They stated that you can't operate a business on no money funding diesel fuel, training, ambulances. So they're requiring money to keep an operation. So it's a catch-22 because you need it and they're going to show up, you hope. And it's a necessity. So now because insurance companies don't like to pay or pay up front, now we're being required to subsidize. So we do fund the fire department, and it's a necessity, and they do go on the same calls, and they take people out of cars. So, I mean, it's an emergency service. And you're talking to other townships like, Skippack, I'm assuming, and they're all funding this thing. They're putting money up, so they're not crying poor. So I believe that we have to do it because you need it, and it's public safety. So I believe that we should be proactive. Dan will do his due diligence as he will. Bradford would be a beautiful thing if he could fund something. I'm sure he helped us buy a fire truck. I'm sure he could help buy a few ambulances, I'm sure. And maybe even a new facility. Why not? We need a new brick building somewhere.
Okay.
So let's
All right.
let's not wait too long for this. Let's
That's fine.
actively.
So Dan, your marching orders are to put pen to paper and get something drafted and validate some of the numbers, verify what we think we know, find out if there are holes in that, and certainly call around and make sure we're making a good decision if we decide to take something up on that. I think we're on the right track, and let's move it forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other business they wish to bring before the board tonight? Okay. Okay, we got one more opportunity for public comment. Does anybody else? Bob? The short answer is absolutely. Absolutely. After Bob talks, then you're next in line.
Bob Andrew, Worcester. I'll try to be brief. Number one, don't have a problem with you funding Skippack EMS or anything else, but $150,000 is a significant line item, and I think that that represents, 15 or 20% of your overage on an annual basis. I think that that needs to be budgeted. And then once it's budgeted and presented to the public and the public can comment on it, I think that's the appropriate forum. It sucks that it's January and I'm basically saying put it off a year. Maybe you should have thought it back in October or November. I don't know, but it's a significant expense and I think it should be budgeted as opposed to just saying, oh, okay, let's fund these people and there's no particular, I mean, they are getting reimbursed. I'm not, and I don't want to take anything away from it, but I would say that in general, there's been a number of high-profile cases of malfeasance with ambulance companies that have been in the public in the recent years. So, coming up with $150,000 on our behalf may be small peanuts, but what kind of oversight do we have in terms of what are we getting for our money? We're paying into a system that, how do we know that, our money's being put to good use? Number two, I respectfully disagree with the decision that you guys made regarding the DEP proposal. I think that's crazy that you have just allocated specific portions of that plant capacity to them, whether they're presentations going forward. I realize that they're contributing the money, but they're also tying in how much they get to use. So you could have recovered all of that cost, you could have done the improvements, and then charged them for those appropriate amounts, but you've made a deal, and hopefully it won't be determined that you made a deal with the devil. You've already proved that, and you can't go back on that, so that's, disagree with the process. I mean, it would be great if you would put these things together and allow people to talk about it, rather than you come before us, here's a resolution, we've made a deal, it's all on paper, and, in this particular case, you guys chose to just go ahead with a minor revision. There was no, really other discussion. Maybe I'm the only outlier there. We'll remember that if that process doesn't go out well. And my final comment is, I appreciate Dan's involvement with trying to appease me and maybe others in terms of providing a breakdown for the bills that are being paid. So now we at least have a list of the bills. And the next baby step that's been made is there's an allocation of those bills, but it's, from my standpoint, inadequate. So in this particular case, it's now being broken down by the general fund and the sewer fund. So we're grouping them all together. But the point that I've made before, you know who you're paying. When those bills are presented and put into the system, you know what accounts they're going to. Just please share those accounts with us before you go to pay the bills so that we can look at those and kind of make our own assessment and make a general comment. Right now, I still don't know where any of these costs are being applied, other than, $37,000 is of the 53 is going to the general fund. But so baby steps. I appreciate that you're maybe heading in the right direction, but in my opinion, you're not there yet. Thank you.
Bob, just a response to one of your items. When Dan and I met with Skip-Ack, Dan brought that up. Hey, I think it was September, October, no, probably October, November. And he said, our budget's already done, things are done. We'll just look at it. But he said, maybe for next year. So Dan already made him aware of the situation about the budgetary process. So he was on top of that. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Bob. Ma'am, you can come forward now.
My name is Marion Ellis, and I am one of the Skip-Ack Township Board of Supervisors. And I was part of the team that came here to speak to you in October about the plight of most of the EMS facilities and practices in the state of Pennsylvania. We are in a crisis mode. And we also had come to give a presentation in February of 2024, which was well in advance of your budget process. So we actually came to speak with you all twice. Not all of you. Steve was certainly there with Dan. So we've made a plea twice last year. We are not getting paid what it costs us to do the prison, and that is definitely a burden on Skipback Township EMS. I am the liaison from the Township Board on the Skipback EMS Board, so I hear it all. I can tell you there is absolutely no malfeasance whatsoever with how funding is handled and bills are paid and received in Skipback EMS. And I would just particularly remind you that you have never paid anything for Skipback EMS to come out and serve your residents. When we did our presentation in October, we even subtracted out. We did not include Meadowbrook's numbers in the figures for the call volumes. So we're not even considering charging you separately for the Meadowwood residents because they do have a subscription and they've been very generous in the past. Whereas the township as a whole has not been. I mean, truth be told, I'm trying to keep it positive and, but as good neighbors and certainly you are first call. So when one of your residents calls 911, Skipback is the first call to all of your residents. It's only when Skipback does not have an ambulance available to send to Worcester or other EMS sent, right? So it's very rare that we can't make a call in Worcester because we are considered to be the first to respond. And so I'd like you to take that into consideration. We also just had some very bad news that the company that the prison was using to pay our bills, first of all, they've never paid them on time, ever. We finally were able to get them for a $2,300 bill to up it to $1,300, what the prison would give us. That happened late in the year, and we've only been paid for 3 of those calls at that rate. So they never pay us what we would certainly need to survive. And the company that is doing their billing has filed for Chapter 11. So now we're also facing the fact that the prison doesn't pay timely, and how are we going to get money from the company who's paying the bills who just filed for Chapter 11? So we are really asking you to really consider this request. We don't come to it lightly. We really appreciate having Worcester as our neighbors, but we would like you to be good neighbors and, pay for something that we have been providing for free for years. Now, I know that we're asking for a per call for 2025, but I didn't hear Dan mention that we had also asked for a contribution for what we did for you in 2024. So it's not only a contribution moving forward that you would certainly, need to put in your budget, but I do know that you are luckily one of the most affluent townships in Montgomery County, and I think that we're not asking too much. It's not too much to ask.
I think you have this board on your side.
Pardon me?
I think you have this board on your side, and I think we're going to try to get Dan to expedite this as soon as possible, whatever we come up with. So I think you're not asking too much by any means, and I know we need it. So I just want to state that, yeah, we're moving forward, and we're going to push them a little harder now that you're bringing this up, so we're going to do what we got to do.
Thank you.
I would ask you that if this prison is such a burden on you and not paying, is Matt Bradford in your realm of, that's a state-run prison, am I right?
Yes, Matt Bradford is definitely aware. Tracy Pennicook is aware. We've also talked to Josh Shapiro's office.
There you go.
So we're pulling together yet another meeting with the prison. This one, after we heard about the Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. And, you know, if we have to, I'm even going to see if we can't get Val Arkush, who is Department of Health and Human Services, that, you know, sat on the board of Montgomery County Commissioners for a couple of years. And I know her personally, and I'm not afraid to go and ask for help when we need it. So yes, Bradford, Pennycook, they're all aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So thank you for putting this on the agenda tonight. I was at our EMS meeting last night as the liaison, and they knew that that this discussion was going to be on the agenda, and they asked me specifically to attend tonight on their behalf. And they really appreciate what you can do for us, and I appreciate you allowing me this chance to speak to you tonight.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your public comments. We appreciate it.
Thank you. You want me to sign this?
If you don't mind, that would be great.
I'm just going to put that on Skipback Board of Supervisors.
That's fine. Does anybody else wish to make public comment? Ed?
Ed Moore, Worcester. Real quick, this is just topical right now. But wouldn't this be a state problem if the companies, I would assume that the billing company that the local prison is using would be one that's used statewide. So I would just say that maybe they should look for additional state support in that regard. So anyway, but that is not my topic. I missed last month's meeting. And so I don't know that this came up or not, but I just want to make sure that it's brought to the board's attention if it hasn't been already. And that is on December 4th, and it's actually topical to this evening. There was a sewage treatment spill at the Valley Green Sewage Treatment Plant right off of Valley Forge Road. I will say that I've had correspondence with Bob DeHolster, and Bob and his team not only responded superbly that evening, but Bob, in correspondence with me, has also done a bang-up job. But there are two things that sort of come to mind as a result of this. One is I've lived in Valley Green for 30 years. It's the first time I've ever heard of sewage treatment spill in that area. I have neighbors, you know, Deb Walker, she's lived here in the Valley Green 40-some years. Deb said she's never heard it. I can't help but think, I know, and I confirmed this with Bob, that there was an upgrade done to the Valley Green treatment plant about 2 years ago that was an upgrade in place. It was supposed to, it didn't increase the scale of the plant, but increased the capacity. But I believe that was done in light of impending development, particularly the reserve at Center Square, the golf course. However, I can't help but wonder, so the golf course development is I don't know how far into it they are, but they're pretty far into it. It's utilizing the plant. For the first time in 30-some years, 40-some years, we have a spill coming out of that sewage treatment plant. Is it a capacity issue? Okay. There are future development. I'll be here next week for Palmer. Okay. So, Lou, to your point, I think this is a problem that goes beyond just, Burks, I'm sorry. And we do need to look at this as a holistic solution, encompassing not only a single wastewater treatment plant, but obviously others. And the other thing is, I'm concerned about the design itself. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm an XIT guy, and we always built what's called N+1, which is you put X number of things together, working in unison, and you always add an extra one in case you have to take one out for service or one fails. The other, whatever number, continue to perform. It appears that when Valley Green went down, or the sewage spill occurred, there was a motor blower, I don't know, failure of a single unit, and that resulted in the spill. So I'm also questioning, do we have the right design in place? So as part of this overall assessment that it sounds like you're undergoing, I think we also need to look at not only do we have the right capacities, do we also have the right design specs to address, maintenance issues, problem issues, et cetera. So not sure if you guys are aware of that, but welcome any feedback.
Okay. Appreciate it. I don't have answers to those. I made notes, Ed, on those questions in terms of the looking into what happened in December and what, whether we have more information behind that. And certainly when we made some adjustments over at Meadowood, certainly one of the things we did was we changed, to your point, we made a change on sort of how it was behaving, so you had, if one failed, you had
Mm-hmm.
so you didn't have a failure causing, sort of a domino effect of issues. So, I mean, certainly some of the design issues probably need to be looked at because the stuff was put in place at a time when there was different.
And I actually also, and I just realized I should be clear about this. This isn't just like something I'm concerned about that, something occurred inside the physical plant. This actually spilled into the Valley Green neighborhood. It came out a manhole on Defford Drive. So this was in the public domain. Okay, so I mean, it's a health issue. It really needs to get it sounds like it needs more light of day.
Okay,
Okay?
got it.
Just to follow up to your question, I think we're all aware of Meadowood up there. And, we have a lot of sewer issues with the pipe in Meadowood and the pumping stations and stuff. And once again, we weren't involved in that deal. It was done 30 years ago. And I think Lou and I sat there and looked at it one time, and even Rick scratching her head that why are we responsible for fixing the stuff on Meadowood's land? And we've had to do quite a bit of fixing there over the years. And it's like, really? So I think we got burned a couple times, and I think we've learned from that a little bit to make sure, and I think to Lou's point, bringing some expert people in to work with sewer plants to make sure everything's being covered from an outside view. So I appreciate your comments, but
Again, I think it's not just a matter of capacities and throughputs and things like that. It's overall design. I mean, can we accommodate when something doesn't work the way it's supposed to?
And it gets back sometimes to the size of the pipe. Sometimes
Absolutely.
these pipes come in and say, well, we can, under pressure, we can pump it at 2.5 inches. And it just seems if you're putting a pipe in, you put a little bigger pipe in to make the stuff go through in case it gets clogged up or backed up. It's much easier to clean a 4-inch pipe out than a 2-inch pipe.
Yeah. So like I said, and again, it struck me as the first time this has occurred, and it's sort of hot on the heels of Center Square Reserve going in.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. Does anybody else wish to make public comment to the board this evening? Seeing none, then motion to adjourn. Thank you all for coming.